Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
Friends, welcome to today's episode of Complex Creatures, the podcast where we explore spirituality and the common good. Today we're exploring one of the most compelling tools for spiritual awareness and transformation. It's called the Enneagram. Maybe you've heard of it. While often seen as a personality test or assessment, the Enneagram is far more than just a typical typology. Enneagram practitioners think it maps the soul, revealing both our deep motivations and our pathways toward growth, healing, and maybe even holiness. In the Christian tradition, the Enneagram has found resonance with ancient wisdom about things like sin and virtue and even spiritual formation. It helps to name the false self we so often live from and invites us into a deeper encounter with our true self, our identity rooted in God. For many, it has become a tool for discipleship, pastoral care, and even community life. Yes, there are those who like to use it as a labeling tool, but that's not what we're going in for here today. We're going in for something much more helpful. Today, we're honored to be joined by a minister and colleague. She's a certified Enneagram coach. Her name is Jamie Butcher. She is the senior minister at Covenant Presbyterian in Atlanta, Georgia, on Peachtree Road, the High Street in Atlanta. Her work bridges spiritual depth and practical insight, and she's always got the mind of someone who actually cares about the depths of each person's spiritual journey. Together, we're going to explore how the Enneagram can help us move from reactionary living to more reflective living, from self-protection to self-giving, and ultimately into a life that looks more, hopefully, like Christ. Whether or not you're brand new to the Enneagram, or you've studied it for years, I hope this conversation will offer you a richer sense of how this ancient wisdom can guide us in all of our spiritual journeys today, and in so doing, make us better for the world around us. Give this a listen. Well, Pastor Jamie, thank you for being here. Just to drive down the road from Covenant Presbyterian Church, thank you for being here today.
You're very welcome.
In addition to your role as a pastor of a historic congregation, you're also a facilitator and coach focusing on the Enneagram. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to talk with you because Enneagram, at least in the Christian world, is it's been popular for many years now. I mean, I would sometimes over the years roll my eyes when someone would start a conversation by what number are you? And I really resisted taking the assessments for a long time because of that. I remember the days of going through Myers-Briggs and other things and feeling like once you discovered that, it was really easy to sort of pigeonhole each other and to almost think in almost totalizing ways about the findings. I say all that to say, why the Enneagram, and why do you think Christians in particular love it?
Ooh. So thank you for having me. I do love the Enneagram, and I do think it is, it offers a lot for us. It's a pathway, in my understanding, it's a pathway to the divine. It's a contemplative practice that we find in the Christian tradition. We also find space for the Enneagram in other faith traditions, in the mystic sects, for lack of a better word, of those other traditions. And so it reminds me of other contemplative practices that are found across faith traditions, like prayer or study of Holy Scripture or meditation. These are practices that have been handed down through the ages for us to pursue and to get close to God. I love unpacking the word contemplation in order to understand my particular approach to the Enneagram. And that word contemplation has three parts. The root is templa, and this comes from the understanding back in the day of a stacked heaven, and the templa was where God resided.
Okay.
And then we understand con means with.
Yes.
And then tion in any word is going to mean in an ongoing way. So contemplation is offering us ways, practices, pathways to be with God in the place where God resides in an ongoing way. And for me, there is no better invitation than that for me, for you, for anyone practicing their faith and spirituality, but to be with God where God resides in an ongoing way. And the reason I mention that in relationship to how you started the conversation is because we have through the years taken the Enneagram as more of a personality typing system and tool. And so we can put people in a box. We can think we know everything about them because we know their number, right? You kind of mentioned this as, the cocktail party conversation, right?
Right. You're such an 8.
Yes, you're such an 8. And my training that I did with Enneagram Institute, which is Don Riso, Russ Hudson, they say, my teacher said, if the Enneagram is not a tool of compassion, then it is not the Enneagram. And so they're really rooting us in this practice of the Enneagram as a pathway for to the divine, for compassion for self and others. And so the way I put this in practice and why I think this is important for Christians, for us who are, for we who are living out our faiths, it is important for us because it gives us a way to center, to focus on God, to be open to understanding and finding grace for ourselves and for other people.
Well, let's talk about how that works. Let's get specific. Can I ask, what is your primary Enneagram number that you
Yes.
you understand?
So I'm a 9.
So is my wife, I think.
Yeah.
By the way.
Remind me what yours type.
So it's interesting. I would have identified as a 2 most of the times I've ever taken it until I was at the workshop that we shared it together.
Yeah.
And you led us through a different sort of assessment than I've ever taken. Most of the assessments I've taken were, answering questions, filling in a dot, how I would respond to different questions. We took a narrative assessment. And each paragraph represented a different number, but they were all mixed up. And you asked us to underline the statements in the paragraphs that you most identified with. I will say that the paragraph associated with 2, I underlined a great deal of it. And it was the second most that I underlined. The other paragraph that I underlined the most of was also the paragraph that my 2 colleagues here on staff that were with me, who were sitting near me when we were doing this, they kept pointing at, going, "That's you, that's you." And that was the 7.
Okay.
Which when I told my wife, she was shocked by.
Okay.
But the way in which I've kind of tried to wrap my head around is there's this notion of the 7s as being maybe flighty or given off to just almost like being baseless, moving from one place to another, or being kind of the vagabond traveler or something like that. It's an adventurer, But in a very real way, the way I think I come across to like people who I love and my staff who are people who work with me is I get an idea or I capture a thought, I have it, and I think I've said it once. Everyone should get it. We should all move on. I'm down the road. I'm like, to the next thing.
Yes.
And I never even realized that about myself until we took that assessment.
Good.
That they said, yes, you have it, you process it, you moved on real quick.
Yeah.
And so that is the area where I started realizing maybe I am a lot more like that. I am looking for the next opportunity or the next thing, even though I very much love being situated in a place. So that was that. This is the thing I've been thinking about for about a year now. Is how do I relate to these? Why do you think Christians seem to like it? Why is it so popular?
Okay.
Because there's a guy named Todd Wilson I know who is a biblical scholar, an evangelical pastor,
Right.
And I was at a meeting once with him. He's just a sweet guy. And he goes, you want to make $1 million, write a book called Enneagram for the Church. And start typing churches. Like, he was being kind of silly, but he also then wrote a book like that. Because he's like, because a certain amount of Christians seem to eat it up. Why do you think that is?
Okay. I think this is connected to a point that I was hoping to make. And I really believe this. I think that the Enneagram reminds us when we are approaching it as this pathway and connection and sense of discernment and understanding, that the Enneagram reminds us that we are more than who we are when we show up as our personality, that we are beloved children of God. And there's so much in our world that pulls us away from that spiritual identity. And as Christians, as people, in this day and age, people who are coming to church and practicing faith, they are making a decision to do that, right? There's very much less kind of Christianity by osmosis than when I was growing up in East Tennessee, right? People are making a choice to follow the faith, and I think that is wonderful. And one of the reasons that people are making that choice is because there is deeper meaning, there are greater relationships, there is a life in Christ that moves us beyond this world. And so to remember that we are created as beloved human beings with this great capacity to love and hope in the kingdom of God, and the Enneagram, partially and on some days, but the Enneagram, along with other spiritual practices like worship or scripture reading or prayer, it draws us back to that fundamental, ineffable core of ourselves, that we are beloved. And so I think there's a lot to that as why we are attracted to the Enneagram. I do also think that it helps. It helps when you learn this tool. Sometimes in premarital counseling, and I do Enneagram as premarital counseling. In the Presbyterian Church, we're required to offer counseling to anyone we marry, and so my particular approach is to offer Enneagram. And I do think it helps in relationships, right? When you understand another person's lens. People always ask, well, I'm a 2, she's a 3. Does that mean we're not going to work, right? And the answer to that is no. We all have the capacity to function at higher levels and lower levels. Right? And so we all have the capacity to have broken relationships, and we all have the capacity to have healthy relationships. And so the Enneagram just helps give us a better sense of understanding of ourselves and grace for ourselves and grace for other people. And I think tapping into that, we get a little bit of a sense of the grace that Jesus has for us, which is beyond amazing. And the Enneagram helps us tap into that compassion.
I like that. I think that I've talked to more than enough counselors and therapists that have a little bit more suspicion about it or skepticism about it. But the therapists that I talk to, and I do talk to a therapist helping me to process my life in ways and think through stuff that I've been through. And I have a spiritual director as well. They both said the same thing to me. They both said, the Enneagram is a data point. It doesn't exhaust your personality, right? It's a data point. It's something good to learn along the way. And I think temperament, personality, assessment, sorters, whatever, I think that's what they're good for. But what you're saying that I find valuable and why it's worth looking into more is that is the spiritual component that goes underneath the personality stuff. That it can help us in our contemplative practices. It can help us understand the way we might naturally relate to God and one another better. One of the exercises we did in our workshop, is that you had to stand in a circle at the end, and we took prayer postures based on our numbers. Now, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but like it seemed like there was for maybe a 1, which might be seen as the type A person, a person who's like, is very detail oriented, has everything figured out, organized, right? However you want to put it.
Right.
There was a more of a letting go posture of prayer.
Right.
I thought that was really helpful because it was just a way of trying to be embodied in a way that spoke or opened you up. What was the 7? Do you remember?
I don't.
You don't?
I'd have to get back and look at it. But that is one of the ways that I like to teach the Enneagram, is not just the data points. We do that. We do the testing. And I often will offer multiple choice tests as well, using the Ready that Enneagram Institute does, because people, certain types, right, really like that information.
Right.
And so there are different ways you can get at the information. But the way that I really like to teach, what I like to bring, is the practice of the Enneagram. And that is where we talk about postures. We do this meditation that centers you in the various centers of learning, which is connected to the Enneagram, the body, the heart, and the mind. And then we also look at scripture. Right, and did a little Bible study, kind of taking on the lens of one of the types through to approach a particular scripture. I think we had mantras too, or sayings that you can say for your type. And so the Examine, it's interesting because we were at the Ignatius house.
We were.
So this Ignatian Examine, I think you can take that through a lens of the Enneagram and kind of see how you showed up that day, and how that helped with your connection, or how you felt disconnected to God.
When you talk about having compassion for yourself and for others, I will tell you that I started, at that time, I was in a newer friendship with somebody. Like, it was a new friend, and I found out, discovered through my journey of getting to know them, that they were an 8. I brought that up earlier.
Yeah.
And starting to learn a little bit more about why they react, or not why they react, but so a little bit more behind some of their reactions to people in leadership. Like there was I noticed that there was a little more skepticism in things, and it didn't answer. I don't know all the reasons why they had this stance, but once I started to understand a little bit about the 8, a little bit about them, heard more about their history, maybe why they felt certain ways, I realized that this person isn't necessarily in a meeting trying to be insubordinate or cheeky or smart alecky or whatever it can come across as at times. They have this deep value in them of standing up for people who might get overlooked or picked on or whatnot. And it gave me this glowing sense of joy for them.
Yeah.
And what I didn't understand before, right?
Yes.
Because it was coming, all of what I was seeing was coming from a very positive place. That they were going to stand up for other people.
Yes, I think that is deeply ingrained in the 8. And one of the other things about the 8 is a fight is an invitation to relationship. So what someone else, or an argument, let's say that,
right.
it's an invitation to be in relationship with that person. And so if you have the lens of the Enneagram, it can help you be curious about how someone is showing up, right? And so that curiosity can help with the deepening of the relationship, for sure.
And likewise, and I think I called you on the phone, I don't know if you recall this, to tell you about the musician I learned about named Sleeping at Last.
Yes.
Was the name. And singer-songwriter type. I don't know, sometimes I think he might have a collective of musicians. It seems like a fella because I see the image on Spotify. He's got an album called Enneagram, and I started listening to it after our time together. And I think he's very adept at writing songs that describe the numbers. But there's certain ones I really like and I'm drawn to. And the one for the ones out there, when I just grew in compassion listening to someone who wanted to take on the problems of the world and fix them. And in the songs you don't have to save the world, basically. I mean, the language is, I'm losing the exact lyrics, but like someone's there for you too. You can't lift everything. And I started thinking of the ones in my life who put a lot on themselves. Sometimes they might be the oldest in the family. I mean, sometimes, right? But those people that take on a lot of responsibility that's thrust on them, and then they also sometimes take on. I just thought, wow, that's a lot to bear.
Yeah, that's that is a great way to enter the Enneagram. I think that album, Sleeping at Last, is really a wonderful, I agree. It's beautiful music, very adept at articulating some of the perspectives. We use that in my training, in fact. So, it's approved. And that reminds me, one of the other ways that I teach Enneagram as a practice is the compassionate actions for self and others. I don't know if you remember that, but that's something that I believe we went through, that I tend to go through, and that is saying, okay, for a 1, if you want to be compassionate toward a 1 in your life, the compassionate action for the 1 is to offer to do something, to take on something for them, and then do it well. So it's interesting what
I came
Reed
back
says.
from that retreat doing that for my colleague on staff who's a 1. Immediately.
How did it land?
I think well. I mean, I didn't go spell it out. That's why I was doing it. I mean, because they were in the same workshop, but I know I could. I knew that resonated, and I could tell just from your So in a very real way, I think that we talk at Complex Creatures about spirituality and the common good, and all too often spirituality is seen as just personal growth, which I think in the ghetto of Enneagram world, I think that if we just are shallow with it, that's what it could be for people. A way of describing myself and other people, kind of a neat thing. But there's so much more depth here with what you're saying. And it also, the way you're talking about it, gives us the tools to be better in how we love our neighbor, or better in how we relate to people, or more compassionate and empathetic.
Yes. I wholeheartedly agree. One of the ways that getting at the Enneagram, which we didn't do, and I don't do in an introduction or retreat, because it's, honestly, you approach some pretty difficult things, but there's a way at getting at typing where you look at yourself through type at your worst. And that can be a way to really develop self-compassion. And when you're able to have grace and compassion for yourself at your worst, the amazing thing that happens is that seems to be able to extend to other people who are struggling at their worst. And so it does give us a way to be supportive, loving, honest in community, right? In ways that are pretty profound. And it starts with that discernment and that self-understanding and access to compassion that, hey, we all show up at our worst sometimes. And we have ways that we are helped. And one thing I always want to say too is, like, the Enneagram is, and perhaps one of the reasons why therapists aren't a huge fan, some are, right? But it's not necessarily a part of their skill set or toolbox, is it's not a substitute for therapy or mental health care. And in fact, when you look at Enneagram work, some of the things that will happen is it will say, when you're looking at the levels of health and when you're not at your best, part of the understanding of when we're not at our best is when we need to seek help or get help for other people. So the Enneagram's not an answer to mental health crisis. It's not. But it is a way to help us develop compassion and understand when we need to tap into other resources.
There's a friend of mine who's a clergy person in another state, and I heard him say at a meeting recently that he loves to read biographies of leaders who have the same Enneagram number as him, as like a practice.
Okay, cool.
Ironically, or not rather coincidentally, he's a 7. And so
Okay.
I just said, who are some 7 leaders that you know? I was curious. And
Yeah.
then he gave me some names. And he just said that it helps him in his mind think about ways that other people who maybe start from a similar sort of place have led. Now, I don't know, maybe that's just a curiosity or an interest. What do you think about that as a practice? Do you think that would, or is that just kind of?
Well, so I have done a lot of Enneagram training in leadership settings. So I certainly think of Enneagram and leadership as closely connected. I don't like to type famous people. I don't like to type anyone. I only use what people have told me that their type is.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to the starting point of, that cocktail conversation.
So you don't type your husband?
No. And I don't type my child.
Yeah.
Right? And that's challenging.
Because we listened to Sleeping at Last on Spotify in the car, and then my daughter, who's 12, heard about this.
Yeah.
And she's like, "What number am I?" I'm like, "You're too young."
Yeah.
And, well, first off, I don't like. I really do not want us to pigeonhole ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like I have this deep underlying insecurity from when I was a kid about my intelligence, right? Like so. It's not from my parents. It's nothing else. It's just insecurity from school. So even though I've gone all the way through school and I pursued and finished a PhD and all these things, whenever I do personality things that put me like not into thinker categories but feeler categories, it always pokes at that little thing that says, "Well, you're not much of a thinker, are you?" Right? Now that's just my own stuff, but I don't want my kid to be putting all the and just because it says that you might be strong or weak or something in an area doesn't mean you have to always be. I mean,
absolutely not.
Right. So,
yeah.
So I was very cautious about my kids even thinking about it.
Yeah. And Richard Rohr says that we shouldn't type until we're in like our mid-20s. So I know I've done some resourcing for youth group directors. So, it's not like I'm really strict on this. But the idea, I am really strict on people self-typing because a part of the joy of the Enneagram is getting to hear through this common language how people understand themselves and their stories and how they find grace for themselves and how they connect to community and to the divine. And that is a huge gift. So if I had sat with my husband and been like, "I think you're X," I wouldn't have gotten to hear his story of how he understands himself as a particular type. And that's the blessing, to get to learn someone more.
I had these experiences where I was sort of that person in these parties and gatherings where I hadn't done it and I didn't want to do it because everyone was doing it. And and then they would say, the group would say, "Oh, well, that makes you a this. Oh, you're such a this." And then I'm like, "See, that's why I don't want to do it, because you're saying I'm X." And like, "Well, that even makes you," and it would just drive me up the wall. But, and I think that's the danger of it. Like, and I remember growing up in other areas of my life and learning other assessments, and then, well, you're a whatever on the DISC profile, and just kind of finding a way, it's for us, it feels useful to have a way to categorize someone when you look at them. But in a way, that's sort of violent to their spirit, because you're just reducing.
Absolutely. And what the Enneagram says is the Enneagram does not put you in a box. It shows you the box that you will often go into. But the Enneagram is not reducing, even if you're confident in your type, the Enneagram does not reduce you to the type. It actually says this pathway enables us to know our type and then loosen the grip of that type. So that you can show up as more of who you are created to be than how you show up when you show up as your personality. So even knowing that, you're a certain type just gives you access to understanding yourself when you show up, gripped by that type, right? And some discernment and some practice you can do around that. But also it allows yourself to know that you can try on different things, that you have access to all the circle of the Enneagram. And I do think in certain spaces, we show up in different ways. So we might have to tap into our wing, we might have to tap into our integration point, our disintegration point. You know, there are places we go that we have easier access to depending on our type.
Right.
But we do have access to that full circle.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm going to leave it for anyone listening who doesn't know to go study more, but there's 9 types and there's wings and there's, like you were talking about, there's complexity there. The question I really want us to think about now is, you're Christian pastor, Presbyterian specifically pastor, Jamie, and we've been talking about this in relationship to spirituality in very Christian terms. But is there an audience that uses the Enneagram outside of the Christian church, or is it accessible to other people of other faiths?
Absolutely. So the Enneagram shape is found in the mystic sects of various faith traditions.
And what shape you mean?
Yes, the 9.
The star?
Yes, it's a circle, then mapped onto that is a triangle, and then mapped onto that is a hexad. So you can
easy
Google
for you
it.
to say.
Right. You can Google it. Not to draw. It's not easy to draw. But that has been found, and Richard Rohr does studying on this. He wrote kind of the seminal work on the Christian approach to the Enneagram. And so he explores how that shape is found in the Christian desert tradition of the fathers and mothers of the ascetic tradition, you know, back in the 200s, 300s. And then also that shape is found in Kabbalah in Judaism, the kind of mystical tradition of Judaism, and also Sufism of Islam. So again, that it's very much, I see the Enneagram starting point as a pathway that's available to many, many people. Kind of like prayer is important in every religious tradition. Worship, you know, it looks different according to your faith background, and certainly as Christians, our understanding of the Enneagram is going to be different than someone from another faith tradition. But that starting point of practice is something that is very much interfaith. You mentioned kind of the secular person. How would they engage? It's definitely in the secular world because, you know, my sister will be like, oh, you know, Brene Brown or Glennon Doyle, you know, she listens to various podcasts. Like they've been talking about the Enneagram. Suzanne Stabile is someone, she's from a faith tradition, but her approach to the Enneagram really moves outside of that. Don Riso, Russ Hudson, I mean, it's spirituality, I think, but it's certainly not a religious tradition or within a particular Christian institution. So it's definitely a starting point for people who are curious about relationship and building meaningful community.
Wonderful, wonderful. You're a 9. My wife says she's a 9. And I understand that 9s can sometimes be confused in terms of others because they tend to blend in, so to speak. That's interesting. And I'm not asking about you. You are a pastor of a congregation. You lead. You teach. Do you think being a 9 lends you certain skills that help in that regard? Do you think being a 9 gives some challenges? What do you think about that in terms of your own role?
I think that's a great question. I think that knowing your type does help you discern the strengths and weaknesses of your leadership style. One of the things I've found, Jarrod, and I don't know if this will resonate with you, but one of the ways knowing I'm a 9 is when a situation calls for me to show up in a different way. So perhaps with more kind of clarity or forcefulness or, you know, energy for something that is a particular idea that I have, right? So that kind of clearly defining self is something that 9s shy away from. But there are times in leadership when that's called for.
Yes.
And so the thing that the Enneagram helps me with is being curious about how I respond to that, right? So it might take a lot of energy for me to do that. It might feel really exciting for me to do that. It's not my it's not the neural pathway that usually fires for me. So I'm exploring something new. And so what I find is that the Enneagram helps me get curious and compassionate toward myself when I am experiencing leading in a variety of ways. So, applying that to the 7, it might be interesting to think about when something kind of slows down, when you have to go into details. You do these things, right? Because you're a capable leader.
This is what's been helpful. Well, I don't know that I'm a capable leader, but I will tell you, I will get exhausted. Like, look, let's say I adopt a new concept. Like, let's say I learn about something having to do with how racism is worked institutionally in a way that I didn't know. I learn it, and then I told someone about it, and then I think, boom, let's move on. Like, it's done for me. Like,
yes.
I've believed it for years now, right? And letting people catch up to that, grow into it, accept it, chew on it, is something that I just thought, well, I must not have communicated it well enough. Well, it's not about that. Also, it's about time.
Yeah.
And then there's the 2 stuff that I still identify with. There, I have the capacity to, like, I want to help somebody, and I can, I remember days, especially earlier on in my roles, where I emotionally gave myself to other people's problems and difficulties in ways that were harmful to me. Like, I'm going to help you so much that I'm too invested, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that I didn't have a proper emotional boundary. Right? So there's ways in which I see those things, and to me, they're kind of some slow down flags for me.
Yes, I think that's right. And I was talking about the levels of health, and that's another layer of the Enneagram. And I mentioned the red flags, right, when you're at your worst, but there's also something they call the yellow flag. And that is for your type when this is happening. It's just that opportunity to pause a little bit and to say, okay, I'm really acting within my role as a type, and to remember that you have the capacity to do more than that. At your best, you can access all these different ways of being in the world.
If you were to point out a book that you just sent anyone to, the best book or your favorite book on this topic, what would it be?
So that's a great question. Suzanne Stabile and Ian Crone have written a couple that are fantastic. The Path Back to You, I think is what it's called.
The Road Back to You?
The Road Back to You. That's an introduction.
Yes,
it's good. It's kind of a good introduction. Don Riso and Russ Hudson have the wisdom of the Enneagram, that if you want that deeper dive, for me, that's the best place to go. I mentioned Richard Rohr as well. His work, I think, is very interesting from a Christian perspective.
Right.
If that's kind of what interests you or where you want to start. I think talking Enneagram with a small group, with a spiritual director, that can be a really wonderful way to learn.
I'm hoping to do some future conversations on this show about spiritual direction. I find that not enough people understand what that is. I have a colleague on staff who once said to me, I said, I'm doing spiritual direction, and then they said, well, isn't that what you do already as a pastor? And so this very unique role of being a holy friend and listener, there's just a uniqueness to it that I can't wait to explore more for people. But I think you're right. I think it's a great way to help people to see where they're starting from, and maybe even ways that they can, easy is the wrong word, but naturally flow into the contemplative life that makes sense to their starting point, I guess. Are there any documentaries or films? Do you know? I mean, I'm actually asking that without knowing.
I don't think so. There are some good podcasts out there. Ian Crone and Suzanne Stabile had a podcast that accompanied their book. It was really outstanding. I don't think I've watched anything on the Enneagram.
Okay.
But I'm not a big TV person. So there probably is. I just don't know it.
With your work, I mean, Covenant Presbyterian in Atlanta, Georgia, but do you have a website or a list of resources we can turn people to?
So I do have a website. It's called templapath.com, and it's for my Enneagram work, contemplative path, but Templapath.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a way to, there's some blog posts. They're kind of old, I haven't updated the blog posts because that's really evergreen content, but it's some of these do's and don'ts of the Enneagram, and it just helps articulate my approach, which is as this practice that can lead us in that invitation, to accept that invitation to be with God in the place where God resides in an ongoing way. And we certainly need anchors on that journey, and I think the Enneagram is one of those.
Those are some good questions, I think, for anyone listening. Here's one that's really selfish for me, because I share in the work that you do as a leader of a congregation and a preach. Do you bring this into the task of public preaching and teaching?
So I haven't really, and I think this is interesting. My previous colleague, I was at First Presbyterian Church, and they actually were a part of the reason that I was certified. I'd been working, but they allowed me the time and the money to go ahead and get certified, and I'm grateful for that. And Tony, the pastor there, did a big series on the Enneagram, and I led several things for Sunday schools, and he preached on each perspective. I'm sure that's still on their YouTube channel somewhere. I think he did a great job with it. I don't typically preach from the Enneagram, but I've been in my congregation for, just 3 years, so we're focusing in on Jesus. Not that the Enneagram's not, but I haven't had as much room to explore, various things as to kind of focus on who we are and where we are, and great ends of the church and 7 last words, and but
Pastor Jamie, I think that you probably bring it in ways that you probably don't realize. I bet you think about it without thinking about, like, how are you making an application, or
And one of the things that I'm interested in, as I am curious about, and I haven't seen the resources on this, although the person you mentioned, maybe this would be a good place for me to go to, is I do think organizations take on a type. And that's fascinating. And that is not a situation where an organization can't self-type, right? But I do think, having been in churches and, the living and breathing body of Christ that is a church, they can certainly kind of show up according to certain types. And that matters to how we lead. That matters to where we need to grow. That matters to, where we need to maybe loosen our grip. So that's something I'm curious about. Maybe someone in organizational development could do some of that work.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Pastor Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. And
yes, thank you for having me.
I hope that you have a wonderful season in your work.
Yes, thank you so much.